Thank you for viewing today's presentation. The recording will begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is day 9 of your training, and we are going to be talking to you about the different census surveys, including the American Community Survey, and some of the residency requirements and the criteria that people are going to have questions about when they fill out their census. My name is Jane Black, and I'm a partnership specialist in Idaho. And with me today is Kirsten Stein. She's a partnership specialist from Oregon.
Hello.
Let's talk a little bit about the census surveys. As you know, the US Census Bureau is the survey arm of our US government. And the important part of that is that at any given time, there are over 100 surveys being administered nationwide. So yes, we are right now concerned about our decennial census survey, but know that there are many other surveys that are constantly occurring more often than every 10 years. And we're going to talk about some of the most common surveys. We have the American Community Survey, the Current Population Survey, National Health Interview, National Crime Victimization, Income and Program Participation, and Consumer Expenditure. These surveys often take the place of some of the questions that used to be on our census forms. For those of you that have done census forms in the past, you might remember that there were a lot more than 10 questions. And lots of times the questions that were asked on the decennial surveys were because we needed lots more data. So let's dive in and look at some of the surveys. Here, the American Community Survey. It's a mandatory survey that's conducted annually by the Census Bureau. It's conducted nationwide, and it goes to about 3% of U.S. households since 2005. We also make sure that we get every county and borough in the nation. So while there's 3% of households that take it, they certainly are scattered throughout the entire country. Lots of detailed questions are asked about residence and housing, and it could include income, it could include utilities, and maybe about the commute to work. The purpose of this survey is used a lot by our city planners. If you think about when you're trying to lay out a city and understand what your water and sewer needs are going to be, sometimes the questions don't seem to make any sense. When an American Community Survey is done, there might be a question about the number of toilets that are in your house. Well, that's going to help our city planners be able to determine the water and sewer usage, and especially for certain certain apartment complexes or neighborhoods. They might ask, what time do you normally go to work every day? Because they're trying to plan for traffic light plans. So that's why we pretty much look at a lot of questions. And it's very confusing when we are talking about that the decennial census only has 10 questions. And yet here comes a survey that a census worker might knock on someone's door and ask a lot more than just the 10 questions. Let's look at another survey that we commonly will do. The Current Population Survey. That's sponsored by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So as you can imagine, they're going to be taking a look at maybe employment details. This is going to provide the monthly estimates of the labor force and some annual poverty statistics. Approximately 72,000 households across the country are polled on this. There's 8 interviews over 10 months. So this is over 16 months. So this is a pretty extensive survey. If your household is chosen for this, then you're going to have 8 interviews over 16 months. Basically, it's conducted in the field and via telephone for approximately 10 days. The interviews may vary in length from 10 to 45 minutes. And again, it's going to be detailed questions about employment searches, and income. Again, confusing because when we talk about the decennial survey, when we talk about the decennial census that we do every 10 years, that's the population count. We don't ask about income. We don't ask about employment. But yet here's a survey that's done, and it could be done, over 10 days every month by some households. Another survey that we do, if we go to the next slide, is the National Health Interview Survey. And this is sponsored by the National Center for Health Statistics, and it began actually in 1957. The purpose of this survey is to obtain national information about illness and health services. The sample is an annual survey of approximately 80,000 families. It's a one-time survey, so if a census employee comes to your door and is doing the National Health Interview Survey, once you've completed it, you'll never be asked to do it again. There's detailed questions about health, about illnesses, insurance, and income. Typically, it's collected via a field representative who has a laptop. Another survey that we do is, on the next slide, the National Crime Victimization Survey. This was begun in 1972, and it's sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Statistics and the Department of Justice. Its purpose is to measure the amounts and kinds of crimes committed and the incidents of criminal victimization. Our annual sample, so again, it's done every year, is about 125,000 housing units, and each household is interviewed 7 times over 3.5 years. So it's important that what we're trying to do is follow someone who's been a victim of a crime and really understand the impact of that. There's detailed questions regarding the crimes committed against the household, the income, and the demographics of the household. Again, this is a survey that's done every year to a sampling of people across the country. The next survey we'll talk about is a survey of income and program participation, and this is abbreviated CIP. It's been done by the Census Bureau and sponsored by the Bureau since 1983. Basically, it's households that were followed annually, and we're measuring changes in income and participation in government-assisted programs. There's detailed information that's collected about the demographics of the household, the income of the household, and the assets. Again, this is to get us data and information on programs like the children's reduced free lunch programs with information about the women's and children's WIC contributions. The interview lasts from about 30 minutes to 2 hours. The final survey that we want to talk about is the Consumer Expenditure Survey. And this is, again, sponsored by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's been done since 1979. It's a personal interview that's done quarterly. So every 3 months, the census representative comes to the house, and then there's a diary component. So this is a pretty unique survey. Basically, its purpose is to collect information on buying habits of consumers, and the data is used to revise the Consumer Price Index, which we know is a leading economic indicator. It's an annual sample of about 75,000 households. There's detailed questions asked about consumer spending, income, and demographics. The unique part of this survey is that the interviews last about 30 to 60 minutes and are diaried. They're written down in a diary. And then every quarter, there's another interview that's done that lasts about 90 to 120 minutes. As you know, with all census employees, we are required to have our identification badge on us at all times. We are required to make sure that we, as decennial census employees, do not enter the person's house. Now, some of these other census employees that are doing some of the other surveys, if you imagine you're doing a 2-hour interview with someone, you're probably going to ask to come inside and sit down. If you have a laptop, you may need to plug into a power source. So that's going to be a little bit different, and it's quite confusing. We understand we've gotten, as partner specialists, I've actually gotten calls from city council members asking about, before we were supposed to be going out and knocking on doors, constituents of that city were calling into their city council and saying that they had people knocking on their door, asking really strange questions, saying they were from the Census Bureau. And we've done a lot of education about the 10 questions that we ask and why we ask them in the Decennial survey. But I'm not sure there's been a lot of education about these other surveys. So just be aware you may have people when you're out doing your mobile questionnaire program, or you're maybe doing some events in the public, you may have people come up and ask you and question you about someone who's knocked on their door and the questions they were asked. As a matter of fact, we've got a quick little kind of scenario we want to go over and talk about the experiences that you may actually end up in. We have an example of making this real that in Chubbuck, Idaho, which is a very small town in Idaho, it's pretty rural, you meet a woman while conducting an MQA that says she was recently harassed by the US Census Bureau. Someone claiming to work for the census had stopped by her home 3 times in the last 2 weeks, and they want her to complete a survey. Well, there's a problem there. If she's feeling harassed, she's probably not going to be too interested in doing the decennial survey, even though it may only take her 10 minutes to do. She's also received a request in the mail to participate in the National Health Survey 3 days prior to the Census Bureau employee stopping by her home for the first time. So here's one of those other surveys, the National Health Survey. We talked about it earlier. And lots of questions about health conditions, about things going on. So there's a little bit of a problem. That person's not happy at all. And she actually called the local police on the census employee. And unfortunately, they said he has a history of contacting people in the past. So we've got a situation here where someone has had some interactions with census employees that have not made her very happy. As a representative of the decennial census, as someone working with this person, this may be where you want to think about how you would respond, the right way to respond. One thing that we want to make sure people understand is that all census employees have federal ID badges, and they have to have those badges with them. You also may want to let the person know that you have all of our police departments across the country have been notified of what our census schedule is and when we're going to be out knocking on doors and going through neighborhoods or having events. So the police are our partners in most of our cities across the country, and especially in our region. The other thing is we wish we could ask our other census employees, the ones doing these other surveys, to maybe be a little bit more explicit about identifying the survey that they're doing and not just saying they work for the Census Bureau. People seem to think that the Census Bureau is just the 10-year survey that we're doing. So that's the other thing is to if someone comes up and asks you about the survey, just explain that we do lots of surveys throughout the years. It's more often than every 10 years. We gather lots of data to help our city planners, to help our communities figure out what the needs. And the decennial census survey is a population count that helps us get the right federal dollars and helps us get our political representation correct. So that's what that scenario is about. Let's look at another scenario that you might come across. One of our census partners contacts you about their employee, Sam. So this is someone out in the community contacts you to say, you know, we've got this guy, Sam, working for us. He recently had a visit from someone working for the Census Bureau, and Sam felt very uncomfortable about the questions they were asking. So he asked them to leave. Sam was told by them that he needed to finish the survey. Well, that's probably a little misleading in some ways. When you think about coming and asking questions, again, you want to make very clear that your 10 questions and you have maybe the worksheet or you have the handout that says why we ask. So if Sam is uncomfortable, you can say, well, Sam, let me give you this. Let me help you understand why we're asking these 10 questions. So that's a good piece of literature to have with you, especially if you're maybe at some public events where you might have lots of folks come up. The other thing we know is that it does say on every one of our surveys, every single one we give out, it does have on there that this is required by law to complete. So that's the message that we officially have from the census. The other message is that we don't threaten anyone. We are not an enforcement agency. If someone chooses not to do the census, we are not responsible for anything beyond just noting that they refuse to do the census. We talk to our supervisor and move on. So those are the important points about all the surveys. Let me check in with our moderator and see if there's other questions that we haven't covered that you want to know.
Yeah, Jane, just curious as to the different samplings of the different surveys out there that the Census Bureau produces. So is there any guidance or logic around the amount? For example, the ACS American Community Survey is about 3% of the population. Is there any guidance around why they choose a certain specific sampling of the different surveys out there?
You know, that's a great question. I think from my research on the different surveys, most of the sampling was random, and I think there's a reason for that. Now, some of the data, certainly crime data, they might want to have more specific to be able to follow someone that's been a victim of a crime. They may look at police records and different information along that way. But from my research on the surveys, I think most of our population selections are done randomly. There are, like I say, there was a survey that wanted every county and every borough at least one response. So certainly that's going to be tracked.
Great. And then as a CRR, our census response representatives that are listening to these, you mentioned the different Census Bureau employees will have identification. So what will a census response representative, a CRR, have to be identified when they are out in the field?
We're really excited that these representatives, these CRRs, are actually going to have census shirts, polo shirts. We are very excited. They'll be very visible, very well marked. Anyone that comes up and meets a CRR will know that's a census employee because of the unique shirts that they'll have on. So we're really required, we're expecting every census employee that's out as a CRR to make sure that you have your badge and make sure you have the shirt on that identifies you as a legitimate and representative of the Census Bureau.
And correct me if I'm wrong, they will also have a Census Bureau issued device and I think maybe business cards?
Exactly, Mindy, that's exactly right. They will have an iPad or a laptop, depending on where situation they're in, and they will have a card that identifies the census website as well as the 800 number that someone who maybe doesn't have time or doesn't have the inclination to do right then and there their census, they can go back to the privacy of their home or to a library or to any other resource that they might want to use to complete their census.
Fantastic. Thank you. No other questions on this section.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn things over to Kirsten, and she's going to talk about the residence criteria.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kirsten Stein. I'm a partnership specialist in Oregon, and I've been assigned to talk about the residence criteria for the decennial census. A lot of people want to know where should I be counted, and when they have that question, you'll have the answers. The residence criteria are used to determine where people are counted during the 2020 decennial census. The actual criteria say to count people at their usual residence, which is the place where they live and sleep most of the time. People living in certain types of group facilities, dormitories, nursing homes, or jails, are counted at the group facility. People who do not have a usual residence, people experiencing homelessness or couch surfers, they are counted where they are on census day. Now, you don't have to memorize all of this. Census.gov has a 6-page handout on the residence criteria. You can print that out and keep it with your materials, or you can download it to your Census iPad. And then if you're in an MQA event and someone comes up to you and says, I don't know what to put down for an address, you can just look it up. And this slide deck also will give you all of the possible answers to that question. And there are lots of them. So Census Day was April 1st, just in case there was any question. So if you're at an MQA event and someone comes up to you and asks you for help with their census invitation with them, it will have a login ID number unique to that address. So you can help them go online to this section where they log in to complete their census form. They'll have the 12-digit census ID, and they just type that in and then click on Login. This is the residence question of the online form if they do not have a census ID code. You do not need to have a census ID code to fill out the census online. You can go to this section here, and the first question it asks you is, where will you be living on April 1st, 2020? And then it has a blue help section. And then it asks you to provide your address. Now, if you press the blue help section, this is what you get. You get more information, more detailed information about what we mean by an address. And it's not very complicated. It refers mostly to where would you receive a package delivered to your home. That's the address that we're looking for, the address where you actually live. If someone is using the paper form, it does not ask for an address. It refers to the address on the outside of the mailing envelope, and this is what the address looks like on the outside of the envelope. So using the paper form, this is the first page of it. It goes right into asking about all of the people living or staying at that address being the one that's on the outside of the envelope that they received. There are some common questions asked about residence issues, and there are lots of them. What if I'm away from my usual residence on Census Day? People away from their usual residence on Census Day, such as on a vacation or a business trip, visiting or traveling outside the U.S., or working elsewhere without a usual residence, like truck drivers or traveling salespeople, they are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. Well, what if I have visitors staying with me on Census Day? Visitors on Census Day are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If they do not have a usual residence to return to, they are counted where they are staying on Census Day. Well, what if I live or stay or more than one place? People living away most of the time while working, such as people who live at a residence close to where they work, like a residency hotel, and return regularly to another residence, are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If that cannot be determined, they are counted where they are staying on Census Day. Well, what if I live at, say, 2 or more residences during the year and I can't really decide which one to use? People who live or stay at 2 or more residences during the year, such as snowbirds, are counted at the residence where they live and stay most of the time on Census Day. Where do I count my children if they stay sometimes with me and sometimes with their other parents? Children in shared custody arrangements who live at more than one residence are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If that cannot be determined, they are counted where they are staying on Census Day. Well, what if I'm moving in or out of a residence around Census Day? People who move into a new residence on or before Census Day are counted at the new residence where they are living on Census Day. What if I've moved out of a residence on Census Day and do not move into a new residence until after Census Day? They are counted at the old residence where they were living on Census Day. Well, what if I have moved out of a residence before census day and do not move into a new residence until after census day? Then they are counted where they were staying on census day. People who are born or die around census day, babies born on or before census day, are counted at the residence where they will live and sleep most of the time, even if they are still in the hospital on census day. Babies born after census day are not counted in the census. People who died before census day are also not counted in the census. People who die on or after census day are counted at the residence where they were living and sleeping most of the time as of census day. Well, let's take a little break and test your knowledge thus far. Let's say I'm currently at my vacation home on census day. What should I put as my address? A, my vacation home. B, my other home where I spend most of my time. C, my work address. Or D, any address I choose. The correct answer is B, my other home where I spend most of my time. Number 2, my son was born on April 1st. Where should I count him? And I messed up the letters a little bit. B, the hospital. C, my home. D, the babysitter's home. Or E, I just don't count him. The correct answer is C, my home. Number 3, I messed up the numbers too. We share joint custody of our son. Who should count him? A, mother. B, father. C, who he stays with most of the time. Or D, the grandparents. And the answer is C, who he stays with most of the time. Moving on to relatives, non-relatives, roommates, friends, boarders, and unmarried partners. Babies and children of all ages, including biological, step, adopted, and grandchildren, are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If that cannot be determined, they are counted where they are staying on census day. And we only count babies born on or before census day. Foster children are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If that cannot be determined, they are counted where they are staying on census day. Spouses, parents, siblings, and other close relatives are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If that cannot be determined, they are counted where they are staying on census day. So are you starting to sense a theme here? People are counted where they live and sleep most of the time. If someone says they stay exactly 6 months in one place and exactly 6 months in another, then they're counted where they stayed on census day. That's the answer to most of the residence criteria questions you're going to be asked when you're out in the field. Extended relatives such as grandparents, nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, cousins-in-laws, unmarried partners, housemates or roommates, they are all counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If that cannot be determined, they are counted where they are staying on census day. Roommates or boarders, live-in employees such as caregivers or domestic workers, non-relatives and or friends, they are all counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If that cannot be determined, they are counted where they are staying on census day. Again, remember this one thing. If their residence cannot be determined, they are counted where they are staying on census day. Moving on to people in residential school-related facilities, boarding school students living away from their parents or guardians' home while attending boarding school below the college level, including Bureau of Indian Affairs boarding schools, are counted at their parents' or guardians' homes. This is below the college level. Students in residential schools for people with disabilities are counted at the school. Staff members living at boarding schools or residential schools for people with disabilities are counted at the residence where they live or sleep most of the time. If they do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the school. College students and staff living in college housing. College students living at their parents' or guardians' home while attending college in the U.S. are counted at their parents' or guardians' home. College students living away from their parents' or guardians' home while attending college in the U.S. that are either living on or off campus are counted at the on or off campus residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If they are living in an on-campus student housing on census day, that is where they are counted. College students living away from their parents' or guardians' home while attending college in the U.S., living either on or off campus, but staying at their parents' or guardians' home while on break or vacation, are counted at their parents' or guardians' home. I messed that up. Are counted at the on-campus or off-campus residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If they are living in on-campus housing on census day, they are counted at that on-campus housing unit. This is one of the reasons why we ask for people's names and birth dates. The parents count the college students at home, and the students count themselves at their college apartment or dormitory. So then they get double counted. We know this is going to happen, so this is one of the ways that we correct the double counting of college students. We would much rather overcount than undercount, but we also want to be as accurate as we possibly can. College students who are U.S. citizens living outside the U.S. while attending college outside the U.S. are not counted in the stateside census. College students who are foreign citizens living in the U.S. while attending college in the U.S., living either on or off-campus housing, are counted at the on or off-campus U.S. residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If they are living in college student housing on census day, that is where they are to be counted. Staff members living in college university housing, such as dormitories or residence halls on census day, are counted where they live and sleep most of the time. If they do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the college university housing unit. So let's take another pause and test your knowledge. I have a college exchange student who lives with me this year. Do I count him? A, yes, or B, no? And the answer to that is A, yes. Number 2, my teenage daughter attends high school abroad. Do I count her? A, yes, B, no. And the answer is A, yes, you do count her. Moving on to people in healthcare facilities. People in general.
Person. This is Jen. Let's do a quick pause and see if there's any questions or any comments coming in from our listeners.
Okay.
We do have a question, Kirsten, about the current health crisis with COVID-19. Because of this, a lot of the students have moved home early. So how are those students being counted right now?
They are to be counted where they live and sleep most of the time this year. If they are spending more time at their parents' home because of COVID-19, then that's where they are to be counted. But if they've spent more than 6 months at their dormitory for the year, then that's where they would be counted, or their off-campus apartment.
Great. Is there anything else we need to know about the COVID-19 situation in the residency rules and where people should be counted?
I have an input for that. I know that a lot of the college group quarters counts that we've done and when we worked with the colleges, that we have an agreement that if the students had enrolled for this semester and otherwise without this pandemic, they would be on campus living and going to school, then the school is going to count them in that location. So that's if they had enrolled and were registered for classes in this semester, then the group quarter count will be done there on the campus or in their student housing.
Where they would have otherwise been living.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. No other questions right now, Kirsten?
No other questions?
Not for this section, no.
Okay. People in healthcare facilities. People in general or Veterans Affairs hospitals, except for psychiatric units on census day, including newborn babies still in the hospital on census day, are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If patients or staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the hospital. People in mental psychiatric hospitals and psychiatric units in other hospitals where the primary function is for long-term non-acute care on census day, they are counted at the facility. Staff members are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in assisted living facilities where care is provided for individuals who need help with the activities of daily living but do not need the skilled medical care that is provided in a nursing home are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. People in nursing facilities, skilled nursing facilities, which provide long-term non-acute care, are counted at the facility on census day. Staff members are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they're counted at the facility. People staying at inpatient hospice facilities on census day are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If patients or staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in housing for older adults, people living in housing intended for older adults such as active adult communities, independent living, senior apartments, or retirement communities are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. People in correctional facilities for adults, people in federal and state prisons on census day are counted at the facility. Staff members are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in local jails and other municipal confinement facilities on census day are counted at the facility. Staff members are counted at the residence where they sleep and live most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in federal detention centers on census day, such as Metropolitan Correctional or Detention Centers, Bureau of Indian Affairs Detention Centers, Immigration and Customs Enforcement Service Processing Centers, and ICE detention facilities are counted at the facility. Staff members are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in correctional residential facilities on census day, such as halfway houses, restitution centers, and pre-release, work release, and study centers, they are also counted at the facility. Staff members are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in group homes and residential treatment centers for adults. People in group homes intended for adults in a non-correctional setting on census day are counted at the facility. Staff members are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in residential treatment centers for adults, also non-correctional on census day, are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If residents or staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in juvenile facilities. Does someone have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Are you showing a different slide? It looks like maybe the slides are.
I just selected people in juvenile facilities. That's what's showing on my screen.
Yeah, I don't see that on mine. I'm not sure what happened.
What are you showing?
The people in federal detention centers and people in correctional. So it's about 2 slides back.
That's
People
what I'm showing as well.
It doesn't have a heading? That one?
No.
It's not that one?
I have an authentication required pop-up that just came up for me, so maybe for some reason I got locked out. So I'm going to try and log in here and see if that makes a difference.
Yeah, just enter in your, I paused the recording right now. Just enter in your JBID and your password. I don't know why that happens, but it seems to happen every time we have a recording.
And is the password the same as my, Outlook password?
Yes.
Oh, now it's saying I'm the presenter. What happened?
It's saying Cisco WebEx meeting is temporarily unavailable. Please try again later.
Yeah, I just got connected back in. So, yeah, something happened. Something went berserko. Dang it. We were on a roll, too.
Well, the best part is we paused it, and Lauren is still connected. So even though we're experiencing some of the wonkiness, we're not capturing this right now for the video. So it'll stop right after the question about the slide, which slide's showing, and then it'll resume. So.
All right.
So can we just start over and do it again, and then I won't make any mistakes?
We've only gone 50 minutes. I mean, why not? Let's just go for it. Just start all over. Jane, get ready.
Really? So what?
Absolutely not.
You had my hope.
Not unless you want to be here for another hour.
What slide are people seeing right now?
None.
Right now, nothing. I think, Kristen, it bumped you out.
Well,
Yeah, I think you need to log back in.
Are you connected?
People in group homes and residential treatment centers for adults. People in group homes intended for adults in a non-correctional setting on census day are counted at the facility. Staff members are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in residential treatment centers for adults, also in non-correctional settings on census day, are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If residents or staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in juvenile facilities. People in correctional facilities intended for juveniles on census day. People in group homes for juveniles non-correctional on census day. People in residential treatment centers for juveniles non-correctional on census day are all counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in transitory locations. Any people, including staff members, at transitory locations such as recreational vehicle parks, campgrounds, hotels and motels, hostels, marinas, racetracks, circuses, or carnivals, are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If they do not have a usual home elsewhere, or they cannot determine a place where they live most of the time, they are counted at the transitory location. Does anyone have any questions about that? That's kind of a tricky one.
I don't see any questions coming in. I think we're okay.
Okay. People in workers' residential facilities, people in workers' group living quarters, and job corps centers on census day are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members or residents do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in religious-related residential facilities, people in religious group quarters such as convents and monasteries on census day, they are counted at the facility. People in shelters and people experiencing homelessness. People in domestic violence shelters on census day who are not staff are counted at the facility. Staff members are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. Anyone, both victims and staff, who on census day are in temporary group living quarters established for victims of natural disasters are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If they do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People who on census day are staying in emergency and transitional shelters with sleeping facilities for people experiencing homelessness who are not staff are counted at the shelter. Staff members are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People who on census day are at soup kitchens and regularly scheduled mobile food vans that provide food to people experiencing homelessness are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If they do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the soup kitchen or the mobile food van location where they are on census day. People who on census day are at targeted, non-sheltered outdoor locations where people experiencing homelessness stay without paying are counted at the outdoor location where they are on census day. People who on census day are temporarily displaced or experiencing homelessness and are staying in a residence for a short or indefinite period of time, they are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If that cannot be determined, then they are counted where they are staying on census day. People living
Kirsten,
outside. Yes?
Can I interrupt with a quick question before we move on to the next set of slides? When you were referring to the different facilities that people get counted at, who is actually counting people at the different facilities? Are census employees doing that, or who does the actual counting at all the facilities you mentioned?
Are you talking about the group quarters and the SBE counting events?
Well, you had a few different slides. I mean, we could start with that. Yes, that would be great. But you had a number of different facilities mentioned. But generally, yes, as far as the service-based enumeration.
The service-based enumeration and group quarters, we do have census employees that will be going out and counting people at these facilities. Was that your question?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, they are census employees.
And then in a very random scenario, let's say you have a person that works on the road, 10 days, and then, works all around the country for 10 days, and then they might spend 3 days at home, and then they're back out again. Where would you count that person?
I would count that person where they are staying on census day.
On census day. Okay. And then one more question that has come in is if someone has a family member whose home was destroyed by a tornado and they're displaced because of that, where would they actually respond from, and how would they know to respond if they weren't getting mail at their location because they were displaced?
Well, I guess that would be dependent on where they were staying. If they were staying in a Red Cross shelter, the Red Cross shelter could tell them the census is going on, and they would respond using the address where they live most of the time. Even if their home is destroyed, that is where they had been living most of the time, so that's the address that they would use.
or could they possibly use the location where they're at on census day, depending on what shelter they're in, if that was the case, or the family?
Well, they're required to use the address where they live and stay most of the time. If they live and stayed most of the time, most of the year at the home that was destroyed, that's the address that they would use. If they were staying in the shelter for 2 to 3 weeks or a month till they got back on their feet, they would not use that address. That's not where they would be living or staying most of the time.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, people living outside the United States. People deployed outside the U.S. on Census Day while stationed or assigned in the U.S. who are military or civilian employees of the U.S. government are counted at the U.S. residence where they live and sleep most of the time using administrative data provided by federal agencies. People stationed or assigned outside the U.S. on Census Day who are military or civilian employees of the U.S. government, as well as their dependents living with them outside the U.S., are counted as part of the U.S. federally affiliated overseas population using administrative data provided by federal agencies. People living outside the U.S. on Census Day who are not military and are not civilian employees of the U.S. government and are not dependents living with military or civilian employees of the U.S. government are not counted in the stateside census. And this regards U.S. military personnel only. U.S. military personnel assigned to military barracks, dormitories in the U.S. on Census Day are counted at the military barracks or dormitories. U.S. military personnel and dependents living with them living in the U.S. either on or off base who are not assigned to barracks or dormitories on Census Day are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. U.S. military personnel assigned to U.S. military vessels with the U.S. home port on Census Day are counted at the onshore U.S. residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If they have no onshore U.S. residence, they are counted at the vessel's home port, wherever that might be. People who are active duty patients assigned to a military treatment facility in the U.S. on Census Day are counted at the facility. Staff members are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. People in military, disciplinary barracks, and jails in the U.S. on Census Day are counted at the facility. Staff members are counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. And if staff members do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility. U.S. military personnel who are deployed outside the U.S. while stationed inside the U.S. and are living on or off a military installation outside the U.S. on Census Day are counted at the U.S. residence where they live and sleep most of the time using administrative data provided by the Department of Defense. U.S. military personnel who are stationed outside the U.S. and are living on or off a military installation outside the U.S. on Census Day, as well as dependents living with them outside the U.S., are counted as part of the U.S. federally affiliated overseas population using administrative data provided by the Department of Defense. U.S. military personnel assigned to U.S. military vessels with a home port outside the U.S. on Census Day are counted as part of the U.S. federally affiliated overseas population using administrative data provided by the Department of Defense. And this is my last complicated slide, I promise. Merchant marine personnel on U.S. flag maritime merchant vessels. Crews of U.S. flag maritime merchant vessels docked in a U.S. port on Census Day or sailing from one U.S. port to another U.S. port on Census Day or sailing from a U.S. port to a foreign port on Census Day or sailing from a foreign port to a U.S. port on Census Day are to be counted at the onshore U.S. residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If they have no onshore U.S. residence, they are counted at their vessel, wherever that vessel may happen to be at the time. If the vessel is docked at a U.S. port, sailing from a U.S. port to a foreign port, or sailing from a foreign port to a U.S. port, crew members with no onshore U.S. residence are counted at the U.S. port. If the vessel is sailing from one U.S. port to another U.S. port, crew members with no onshore U.S. residence are counted at the point of departure. Crews of U.S. flag maritime or merchant vessels engaged in U.S. inland waterway transportation on Census Day are counted at the onshore U.S. residence where they live and sleep most of the time. Crews of U.S. flag maritime or merchant vessels docked in a foreign port or sailing from one foreign port to another foreign port on Census Day are not counted in the statewide census. Let's test your knowledge. I sold my house and I now live in an RV and I travel all over the country. What is my address? A, the RV park I'll be at on Census Day. B, the address where I get my mail. C, the address of the house I sold. Or D, I shouldn't do the census. The answer is A, the RV park where I'll be at on Census Day. 2, people experiencing homelessness who don't have a usual home elsewhere are counted at the facility, true or false? And that is true. Number 3, people living outside the U.S. who are not military or civilian employees in the U.S. government, are not counted, true or false? And that answer is true. They're not counted. And that is the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, let's check in with our moderator and see if there's other questions that have come in.
I don't see any questions, but I think we did get some guidance on there on a couple questions, Jane, if you remember back on those questions.
Which questions? The test your knowledge questions?
One of the questions may about places that homes were destroyed. I mean, I think about the fires in California. I think about tornadoes. So the clarification maybe there is that if the home was destroyed, so if the home was actually destroyed, then they would be counted where they live on Census Day. So if they're in a Red Cross shelter, if they're in a temporary facility set up by FEMA, then on Census Day, on April 1st, they get counted at that spot, at that place.
Instead of the home. Go ahead.
I don't think that's what the guidelines say. I'm looking at them. Let's see, correction facilities.
Yeah, that's a unique situation, kind of like the COVID, that's come up probably maybe after the guidelines. We can certainly clarify that, and if you download that 6-page document, it may have.
Yeah. I have that. I'm looking through it now. Transitory.
If the home's destroyed, that's a unique situation for sure. And those are the tough questions. I mean, that'll sure come up. Somebody will perhaps ask that. So
people in domestic shelters.
At the end of the day,
right.
people who want to count everybody.
They are in temporary group living quarters established for victims of natural disasters. Anyone, including staff members staying at the facility, is counted at the residence where they live and sleep most of the time. If they do not have a usual home elsewhere, they are counted at the facility.
Perfect answer. Yep. So they're at the FEMA shelter, they're at the Red Cross shelter. That's where we count them.
If their home's destroyed. Okay.
Yeah. Good job.
Thank you for the clarification, ladies. At this time, there are no other questions.
Did we change that slide?
I don't think we need to change the slide. It's just that clarification of, because the answer's there, and we know that's the right answer. So it's just those nuanced questions, those unique situations that, and it's okay to say as a CRR, I'm not sure. Let me explore that. Let me research that. Give me your contact information, and I'll get back with you. I mean, I think that's an appropriate response. Because there's so many unique situations that are going to come up. There's so many unique circumstances, especially in this time. And we want people to feel like they can answer the questions correctly.
You brought up a great point, Jane, because we will get a lot of questions out in the field that we cannot always answer. And so the guidance to the CRRs listening is that, please, just like Jane said, take their contact information and you can get back to them on that. But we will go into more depth on group quarters during another training, so they can stay tuned for that information.
And we've got more topics we're going to cover. Group quarters is one of those topics we're going to go more into depth. So CRRs, don't hesitate. Don't worry. We're going to cover lots of topics. We're going to go into depth on lots of topics. So we'll cover your questions. We'll help you be able to answer, the right responses to the people that are asking questions. And so we will work with you. We'll help you. We want to make sure you have the right information.
All right, I think that's a wrap. So thank you very much for all the assistance.
Yeah, we want everybody to feel comfortable, to know, if you have questions, reach out to your supervisor, reach out to the partners in your specific areas, in your specific regions, and we will make sure you are confident and you have the information you need.
Thank you, everybody, for watching today's recording. The recording will now end.